Save the dom for the paying customers. She gets the plastic cup. The words didn't slip out. Brett Calloway didn't mumble them, didn't whisper them to a colleague in the back galley where no one could hear. He said them loud enough for seat 1A to hear. Loud enough for seat 1B to hear. Loud enough for Rosa Fuentes in 3A to set down her coffee cup very slowly and reach for her phone. Brett said those words because he had already decided. He decided the moment he pulled the manifest 40 minutes before boarding and saw the name in seat 1A. Hayles N. No status tier printed, no frequent flyer number, no global elite designation. Just a name he didn't recognize. In Brett Calloway's world, a name he didn't recognize in the power seat meant one thing: someone who didn't belong there. He had been flying this route for 22 years. He knew who belonged in first class. He knew their names, their drink orders, their preferred temperature for their hot towel. He knew the senator who liked his Bordeaux opened before wheels up. He knew the Goldman CFO who hated small talk. He knew the London banker who always ordered the halibut and never the steak. These were his people, the ones who made his cabin worth protecting. The woman who walked down the jet bridge in a gray Yale hoodie and worn Converse sneakers was not one of his people. He was certain of that before she said a single word. What Brett Calloway did not know. What no one on Vantage Airways Flight 7 knew. Not the senator, not the banker, not the first officer, not the ground crew at JFK who waved the Boeing 777 backward off the gate. Was that the woman in seat 1A had spent the last 18 hours completing a $4.2 billion acquisition of the very company that operated this flight. He did not know that the battered leather notebook under her arm held the first draft of a policy that would reshape every cabin on every route in Vantage Airways network. He did not know that the phone in her hoodie pocket had a direct line to 4 boards of directors across 2 continents. He did not know that the app she would open 20 minutes after he handed her a plastic cup gave her access to every employee file in the Vantage system, including his. And he did not know that in approximately 7 hours and 40 minutes when Flight 7 touched down at London Heathrow and the jet bridge extended at Gate 7, the person waiting to greet her would not be an officer, would not be security, would be the UK station director of Vantage Airways bowing his head in welcome, addressing her as Ms. Hayles, and asking her to please accept the company's deepest apologies. Brett Calloway would be standing 3 feet away when that happened. He would hear every word. But that is the end of this story, and we are still at the beginning. Before we get into this, drop your city in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever been looked at like you didn't belong somewhere you had every right to be. You're going to want to stay for every second of what comes next. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notifications, because this story is one you will not forget. Now, let's go back to where it started, 40 minutes before boarding. Gate 31, JFK International Airport. The rain outside the terminal windows is relentless, and Brett Calloway is standing in the galley adjusting his tie in the reflection of a coffee maker preparing for what he believes will be another flight he controls completely. He has no idea what is coming. The first-class cabin of Vantage Airways Flight 7 was the kind of space that made people lower their voices without being asked. 8 seats total. Beige leather so soft it seemed to exhale when you sat down. Walnut trim along the overhead panels polished to a warm amber under the cabin's pre-boarding lights. The air carried a faint trace of bergamot pumped through the environmental system at a scent level the airline's hospitality team had calibrated over 3 years of passenger surveys. The rain hammering the fuselage of the Boeing 777-300ER outside was reduced inside to a distant civilized hum. Nothing was allowed to be loud in this space. Nothing was allowed to be wrong. Brett Calloway stood in the forward galley, one hand braced on the counter, the other adjusting the Windsor knot of his tie and the reflective surface of the stainless steel coffee maker. He examined himself with the same precision he would apply to the service card inventory in 20 minutes. Collar straight, cufflinks centered. Silver, not gold. He believed gold was for people who needed to announce themselves. Brett was 52 years old and had been flying this route since he was 30. He wore his 22 years with vantage the way some men wear military medals, as a signal of rank of sacrifice of the right to judge others against a standard they had not earned. He was the senior purser on Flight 7 and had been for 11 of those 22 years. He was in the universe bounded by the forward and aft doors of this aircraft the highest authority. He believed this completely. Melissa Dorff stood 2 steps behind him, holding a tablet and a printed manifest waiting. She was 34, mid-level 5 years with vantage. She had learned early that the fastest way to survive Brett's cabin was to mirror his instincts before he articulated them. She had become very good at this. When Brett narrowed his eyes at a passenger, Melissa's face rearranged itself into the same expression half a second later. She did not think of this as cruelty. She thought of it as professionalism. Knowing the difference between the two was a distinction she had stopped making sometime around year 3. Near the rear of the galley, just visible through the curtain, Priya Sandoval was arranging the champagne flutes on the service tray. She was 26 years old, 4 months into her role with Vantage, transferred from a domestic regional carrier where the cabins were smaller and the politics were simpler. She had taken this job because she believed in it. She still believed in it, but in the specific, effortful way that requires daily renewal, the way you have to reconvince yourself of something you've seen tested. She placed each flute at exactly the correct angle. She had noticed in 4 months that Brett never acknowledged correctly prepared service. He only acknowledged incorrectly prepared service. Brett reached out and took the manifest from Melissa's hands without looking at her. He scanned it. His eyes moved down the seat list with the efficiency of someone conducting a security review. Seat 2F, Alderman R. A Washington, D.C. lobbyist Brett had served 6 times. He liked his sparkling water, still not carbonated, which Brett found absurd but honored without comment. Seat 3 of Fuentes R. Travel journalist Rosa Fuentes. Brett's lip moved slightly. He knew the name vaguely, not from the airline's VIP list, but from somewhere adjacent to it. He filed her under civil but distant. She wasn't the type to tip, he had decided the last time she flew, though he couldn't articulate why. Seat 1B, DeLuca F. Frank DeLuca. This name Brett recognized immediately. Longtime Global Services member. Flew this route 4 or 5 times a year. Old money, quiet habits, expensive watch. Brett would give him the 2012 Bordeaux before wheels up and not need to be asked. Then Seat 1A, Hayles in. Brett stared at it for 3 full seconds. No status tier. No frequent flyer designation. No VIP notation. No Global Services flag. Nothing attached to the name at all except the seat assignment and a departure time. Seat 1. A was the power seat. Window forward, maximum privacy first served on every service round. Vantage reserved it for their top-tier passengers. Global Services members, corporate accounts, occasionally celebrities when the PR team got involved. It was not in Brett's personal taxonomy a seat for unknowns. He handed the manifest back to Melissa. He said without raising his voice, Seat 1A is either a system error or a last-minute upgrade dump from the gate agents. I hate when they do that. Dilutes the whole product. Melissa nodded in the way she always nodded. Like an echo, Brett pushed through the velvet curtain and entered the cabin. He moved through it the way a property owner moves through a building they've renovated themselves, with the particular satisfaction of someone who has decided what everything is worth. He touched the edge of the service console in row 2 as he passed. He checked the temperature on the champagne in the forward ice bucket with 2 fingers. He straightened a headrest cover in 3B that was 1 centimeter off center. Then he settled at the forward position, arms folded, and waited. Behind the galley curtain, Priya watched him through the gap. She had seen this ritual before. She had learned to read the list in Brett's head, the one he compiled from the manifest before a single passenger boarded, the list of who mattered and who was going to be managed. She didn't know who was in Seat 1A, but she had seen Brett's expression when he read the name, and she had learned that when Brett made that expression, tight, satisfied, already certain, something in the flight ahead was going to go wrong. She picked up the champagne flutes. She carried them to the tray. She told herself she would watch. She told herself she would speak up if she needed to. She hadn't found out yet what that decision would cost her. Outside, beyond the rain-blurred windows of the terminal, the boarding door to Gate 31 opened. The jet bridge extended. A line of passengers began to move. And at the back of that line, walking alone with no assistant and no announcement, was a woman in a gray Yale hoodie carrying a battered leather notebook and the deed to everything Brett Calloway thought he owned. She walked down the jet bridge the way people walk when they have nothing to prove, not slowly. She wasn't performing calm. She simply moved at the exact pace she chose. One shoulder carrying a small backpack, the leather notebook tucked under her opposite arm, her worn Converse making almost no sound on the ridged metal floor of the bridge. The rain outside hit the curved walls above her head and ran in thin lines down the exterior. She didn't look at it. Naomi Hayles had been awake for 31 hours. 18 hours ago, she had been in a glass-walled conference room in Midtown Manhattan, signing the final documents of the $4.2 billion acquisition of Vantage Airways Group. The lawyers had wanted champagne in the room. She had asked for water and a 5-minute break before the final signature page. She had stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the city and thought, "This is the part where you don't celebrate yet. This is the part where you get on the plane." So she had gotten on the plane, her own plane technically, though the staff who checked her in at JFK had no idea. She stepped through the cabin door and stopped for half a second. She had reviewed the schematics of this aircraft type many times during the acquisition due diligence process. She knew the seat configuration, the galley layout, the lighting system, the ventilation specs, but knowing something on paper and standing inside it are different experiences. She stood at the threshold of the first-class cabin and took it in with the particular attention of someone who has just become responsible for it. Then she moved to seat 1A. She placed her backpack under the ottoman in front of the seat, correctly, completely under, not half sticking out into the aisle. She sat down. She put the leather notebook on her knee. She clicked open a heavy fountain pen. She wrote a single line at the top of a fresh page in clean block letters: Vantage Airways, New Horizons Initiative, Day 1. Then she looked up. Brett Calloway was standing at the end of the row. He had not greeted her. He had not smiled. He was looking at her with the expression of someone who has already formed a conclusion and is now waiting for the facts to catch up. He said, "Boarding pass." It wasn't a question. It was a border crossing. Naomi reached into the front pocket of her hoodie. She produced a boarding pass. Standard printing, nothing embellished on it. No gold print, no priority status notation, because the system that generated her ticket was a transitional account set up during the acquisition, and the status flags hadn't migrated yet. She held it out. Brett took it. He examined it under the reading light for longer than necessary. The way someone examines a document they have decided in advance is probably fraudulent and are simply building a case. Hayles in, seat 1A, that was all. He handed it back. He said without meeting her eyes, "Is there a problem with your bag?" She looked at her backpack, which was fully under the ottoman. She said, "No, it fits. It's just my laptop and some papers." He said, "Overhead bins are for luggage. We don't like clutter in first class." She said, "It's not in the overhead bin. It's under the seat." He said nothing to that. He pivoted in the smooth professional rotation of someone who has practiced dismissal toward seat 1B. He said, "Mr. DeLuca, welcome aboard, sir. Excellent to see you again. I have the 2009 open. Can I pour you something before pushback?" Frank DeLuca was 61 years old with white hair and a silver watch, and the bearing of a man who had attended enough boardrooms to know when something in a room was wrong. He looked up from his laptop when Brett spoke to him. He nodded. He accepted the offer. He looked at Naomi in 1A. She was not watching Brett. She had returned to her notebook. She was writing. Her pen moved with the consistent, unhurried pace of someone mid-thought. Frank watched her for a moment. Then he went back to his laptop. But he left one earbud out. From row 3, a Rosa Fuentes watched the entire exchange from the moment Naomi sat down. Rosa was 48 years old, a travel journalist with 14 years of bylines and a following of 380,000 people on Instagram who trusted her specifically because she called things what they were. She had been in first class enough times to know the choreography of exclusion when she saw it. The non-greeting, the boarding pass as interrogation, the bag comment. She did not pick up her phone yet. She waited. She was a journalist. She knew the difference between a pattern and an incident. She would not have to wait long. Back in the galley, Priya had seen the exchange through the curtain gap. She saw Brett approach 1A without a smile. She saw the boarding pass examined like evidence. She saw the bag comment made about a bag that wasn't creating any problem whatsoever. She filed it. She watched. Naomi in seat 1. A put her pen down for a moment. She looked out the rain-slicked window at the JFK tarmac. A baggage cart moved past in the gray light, slow and steady, going nowhere in particular. She thought about what she had written at the top of the page. New Horizons. Day 1. She thought, yes, exactly this. This is precisely why I got on a commercial flight. She had been told by 2 members of her transition team to take a private charter to London for the announcement. It would be safer, they said, more controlled. You don't need the exposure of a commercial cabin right now, not in the middle of an acquisition transition. She had said, I need to see what we've built and what we haven't fixed yet. She had said, book me, coach, if first is sold out. She had gotten first class because seat 1A was the only seat left, because a last-minute cancellation 3 hours before Wheels Up had opened it, and the system had automatically assigned it to her transitional executive account. She hadn't arranged it. She hadn't orchestrated anything. She was just a woman who had bought an airline and gotten on it. She clicked her pen again. She started writing. The engines outside powered up in a low, steady hum. The boarding door closed. The jet bridge retracted, and Brett Calloway disappeared into the galley to prepare the pre-departure service, carrying in his mind a certainty about seat 1A that was about to cost him everything he had spent 22 years building. The pre-departure drink service was simple in theory. You moved through first class with a silver tray and a cold bottle, and you offered every passenger a choice. Orange juice, sparkling water, champagne. You poured what they asked for. You smiled. You moved on. Priya understood this. She had been trained on it in her first week. She had performed it without incident on every flight since. She lifted the Dom Perignon from the ice bucket, the neck of the bottle cold enough to make her fingers ache, and she set it on the tray beside 2 crystal flutes and a glass of orange juice she had already poured for the lobbyist in 2F who had pre-ordered it on the app. She stepped through the curtain. She moved through the cabin in order front to back the way she was trained. The lobbyist in 2F got his orange juice and a smile. Frank DeLuca in 1B waved off the tray. Brett had already seen to him. Rosa Fuentes in 3A asked for sparkling water and said thank you twice, which Priya appreciated. Then she turned to seat 1A. Naomi was looking out the window. The tarmac lights were coming on in the early dark. The rain had shifted from hammering to steady, a low percussion against the fuselage. Priya said, "Good evening. Would you like a pre-departure drink? We have orange juice, sparkling water, or champagne." Naomi turned. When she smiled, it changed her face entirely. The exhaustion stepped back and something younger and warmer came forward. She said champagne would be wonderful. It's been a very long few days. Priya reached for the Dom. Her hand was on the neck of the bottle. Brett's hand closed around her wrist. He had come from the galley without sound, without announcement, without any indication he had been watching. But he had been watching. He had been waiting for exactly this moment, and when it arrived, his grip was immediate and certain, his knuckles whitening around Priya's wrist before she had time to register he was there. He leaned in. He spoke at a volume carefully calibrated, quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability, loud enough for 1A and 1B to hear every word. He said, "Save the Dom for the paying customers. She gets the plastic cup." Priya went completely still. The bottle was still in her hand. Brett's hand still on her wrist. In 1B, Frank DeLuca stopped typing. In 3A, Rosa Fuentes' hand moved to her phone. Brett released Priya's wrist. He straightened up. He turned to face seat 1A. He did not crouch to Naomi's eye level. He looked down at her from his full height, a posture so practiced it had become unconscious, and he arranged his face into something that resembled an apology, the way a corporate memo resembles a human conversation. He said, "I apologize. We have a limited inventory of the vintage champagne tonight due to a supply issue. I need to prioritize our revenue passengers who purchased full-fare first-class tickets. For travelers in other ticketing categories, we offer a sparkling rose from the business class stock. I can bring you a glass and a plastic cup if you'd like something before pushback." Every word was a lie. Brett knew it. There were 2 full bottles of Dom Perignon in the forward ice storage. There had never been a supply issue on this route. The idea of denying a seated first-class passenger a pre-departure drink was so far outside Vantage's service guidelines that if Priya had reported it to base management at that moment, Brett would have been written up by Wheels Up. But Brett knew something Priya was only beginning to learn, that the systems designed to prevent this kind of behavior depended entirely on someone invoking them. And his 22 years of seniority had taught him that very few people did. Naomi looked at him. She did not look startled. She did not look wounded. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they have already identified and are simply now confirming. "She said I'm a first-class passenger," he said. "Of course. But our service tiers prioritize full-fare revenue customers. Upgrades and non-revenue travelers receive the standard tier. It's company policy." She said, "Is that Vantage Airways policy?" He said, "It's standard practice." She said, "I see." She reached for her notebook. She opened it to a clean page behind the New Horizons header. She clicked her pen. She wrote something down. Brett watched her write. He felt the faintest flicker of something. Not concern, not yet. More like the sensation of a room temperature changing 1 degree. From 1B, Frank DeLuca spoke. He didn't look up from his laptop when he said it. He just said it flat and businesslike the way he said everything. He said, "I'm not drinking champagne. Give her mine." Brett turned to him. He said, "Sir, that's very generous, but amenity transfers aren't permitted due to liability regulations. I can't allow." Frank opened another bottle. "Brett, we're running low, sir." Frank looked up. He looked at Brett with the patience of a man who had sat in 67 first-class cabins on this route and had never once been told they were running low on Dom Perignon. He said, "That's interesting, because in 67 flights you have never once run low." Brett said, "Supply chain issues have been affecting our catering loads, sir. I apologize for the inconvenience." He said it to Frank while looking at Naomi. He wanted her to hear the apology given to the man he chose to honor and withheld from her. He wanted her to understand the hierarchy he operated. He turned and walked back toward the galley. In 3A, Rosa Fuentes had her phone open. She was not live yet. She was composing an Instagram story with a single line of text and a still image of the service cart from 3 rows back, the unopened Dom Perignon clearly visible in the ice bucket. She typed, "Something is happening in first class on Vantage Flight 7, recording. Stay tuned." She posted it as a story and pressed the record button on her camera. She held the phone low-angled toward the forward rows, capturing without making it obvious she was capturing. At the forward galley, Priya stood with the bottle still in her hand. She looked at it. She looked at the galley curtain through which Brett had disappeared. She thought about 4 months. She thought about what she had told herself when she took this job, about the kind of person she was going to be in it. She thought about whether those 2 things were currently in alignment. She set the bottle down. Naomi, meanwhile, had put her notebook aside and taken out her phone. She opened an application. It loaded slowly. It was new software installed on her phone 72 hours ago by her transition IT team as part of the Vantage acquisition handover. An internal executive management platform that gave direct access to the airline's HR database operational logs, personnel files, and communications infrastructure. Very few people in the world had this application. Every single one of them worked for her. She typed Callaway Brett. The file loaded. Senior Purser. Employee ID 40813. 22 years of service. Base JFK. She scrolled. Performance reviews. Commendations. 14 all from the same period 6 to 10 years ago when the review system apparently worked differently. Complaints. She counted them. 7 spanning 4 years, all marked reviewed, no action taken. 7 complaints. 7 passengers who had sat in a seat they paid for and gotten off the plane feeling like they were wrong to have been there. She navigated away from his file and opened her messaging app. She sent a message to Carla Ibanez, her executive assistant on the ground at JFK. She typed, "Carla, Flight 7 en route to London. Logging incident. Senior Purser Brett Callaway. I'll send the full file when we land. Have Oliver Marsh meet the gate personally. Formal welcome. Tell him I'll explain when I arrive. Carla responded in 40 seconds. Already on it. Do you want security at the gate? Naomi typed, not yet. Let it develop. Keep logging on your end. She put her phone down. Brett returned from the galley. He set a plastic cup of rose on her linen tablecloth. No coaster set with the flat thud of someone who has decided what this interaction is worth. He did not look at her when he put it down. He said, "There you go. Enjoy." Then he turned away. Naomi picked up the plastic cup. She looked at it for a moment. She turned toward the window where the rain was still falling on the JFK tarmac patient and unremarkable. She whispered, "I absolutely will." The engines powered up below her feet. The seatbelt sign chimed on. The plane began to move. Brett Calloway stood at the forward position, arms folded, watching the gate slide away outside the window with the satisfaction of a man who believes he just handled something correctly. He was so wrong about so many things, but he didn't know that yet. And somewhere in the forward ice storage, 2 full bottles of Dom Perignon sat unopened in their silver bucket. Day 1. The seatbelt sign stayed on through the climb. The rain was still hitting the windows as Flight 7 angled upward over the Atlantic coastline, the lights of Long Island visible in brief breaks between the clouds before disappearing entirely. Then, nothing but dark and weather and altitude. Brett moved through the first-class cabin with the unhurried precision of a man in his element. Warm towels distributed in order of perceived importance. Seat 1B got his first. Seat 2F second. He handled the lobbyist's pillow request personally and with warmth. He skipped 1A entirely on the towel service. Not accidentally. Deliberately, with the particular choreography of exclusion that looks like an oversight unless you've been watching the whole sequence. Priya watched the whole sequence. She stood at the galley curtain with a service cloth in her hands that she'd been folding and refolding for 3 minutes without folding it. She knew the towel rotation. She knew it hadn't been an accident. Here's what this moment means. And here's what I want you to sit with before we go further. She had a plastic cup, not because the champagne was gone, not because of a policy, because someone looked at her and made a decision before she said a word. And instead of losing her composure, instead of raising her voice or demanding to speak to someone or making a scene, she picked up that cup and turned to the window and said, "I absolutely will." Have you ever had to do that? Have you ever had to take the plastic cup, in whatever form yours came in, and smile at the window and hold it together when everything in you knew that what just happened was wrong? Drop that in the comments. Tell me your city. Tell me your story. Because this moment right here, the quiet, the notebook, the plastic cup, is what this whole story is really about. Hit subscribe if you haven't yet, because what's coming next is worth being here for. Naomi's pen moved steadily across the paper. She was not writing poetry. She was not processing her feelings in metaphor. She was writing policy. She wrote all fare categories entitled to identical beverage service in first-class cabin. No tiering of amenities based on ticket origin. She underlined it twice. She wrote senior purser discretion on service delivery to be removed as a standard and replaced with documented protocol with accountability tracking. She did not underline this one. She circled it. She wrote complaint review system. Current manager discretion, no mandatory escalation pathway. Required automatic third-party review at 4 complaints in any rolling 12-month period regardless of seniority of subject. She was building the architecture of a different airline mid-flight at 34,000 feet in a Yale hoodie with a plastic cup of rose next to her elbow. Across the aisle in the galley, Priya had stopped refolding the cloth. She was looking at Naomi through the curtain gap with an expression that was trying to sort itself out. She saw a woman who had just been publicly diminished and was responding to it with focused silence. She had expected. She wasn't sure what she had expected. Something more reactive, maybe. Something that looked more like what she felt on Naomi's behalf. But Naomi didn't look like someone absorbing a wound. She looked like someone taking notes. Brett emerged from the galley and passed Priya. He said, without stopping handle 1A from here, "I don't want to deal with the attitude." Priya said, "She hasn't had any attitude, Brett." He said, 4 months in and you're giving me feedback. Go check the rear cart. He walked forward. Priya watched him go. She thought, 4 months in and I've already seen this 3 times. She went to check the rear cart. But before she did, she looked once more at seat 1A. Naomi hadn't looked up from her notebook. She was still writing. The cabin lights had dimmed to their cruise setting, and in the low amber glow, the woman in the hoodie with the battered notebook and the plastic cup looked exactly like what she was. Someone who had already decided what she was going to do about this. Frank DeLuca in 1B had one earbud out. He looked at 1A. He looked at the galley. He looked back at 1A. He moved his armrest to the closed position, a small, deliberate adjustment, and positioned himself at a slight angle that put him physically between seat 1A and the aisle. He opened his newspaper. He did not turn a single page for the next 40 minutes. He was reading the wrong thing entirely. The engines settled into their cruising pitch, that particular low chord of a long-haul flight at altitude steady and total, like whether you live inside. It had always done something to Naomi. Not relaxed her exactly, more like relocated her. Peeled the present back slightly and let the past come through. She put her pen down. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, just to let the sound take her where it always did when she heard it. Newark. A Tuesday in October, 17 years ago. She is 19 and she has saved for 6 months. The scholarship covered tuition and dormitory housing and a small monthly stipend that covered textbooks if she was careful with food. It did not cover the flight home for fall break. She had saved for the flight home herself, 10-hour shifts at the campus dining hall on weekends, 2 tutoring clients she'd found through a flyer she posted in the library. She had enough for the ticket with $43 left over. She decided to use 32 of them to upgrade from economy to first class. Not because she needed the extra space. Because she had never sat in first class. Because she wanted to know what it felt like to be in the forward cabin, to be the person who turned left when they boarded instead of right. She had pressed her second-hand blazer 3 times the night before. She had polished her 1 pair of good shoes. She had her boarding pass printed not on her phone because she wanted the paper in her hand. She boarded. She found her seat. She sat down and looked around at the leather and the walnut trim and the space between the seats, and she felt a specific clean kind of joy, the kind that comes from having earned something small that matters enormously. A flight attendant appeared, middle-aged, efficient. She looked at Naomi. Then she looked at Naomi's boarding pass. Then she looked at Naomi again. She said, "Are you sure you're in the right section, sweetheart?" Naomi showed the pass. The attendant looked at it. Then she walked to a colleague at the forward galley. They spoke in whispers. The colleague looked back at Naomi. The first attendant returned. She scanned the pass with a handheld device. She scanned it again. In the seat directly across the aisle, a white man in a polo shirt was handed a warm glass of champagne and a dish of roasted almonds. No one had asked him for his boarding pass. No one had whispered about him in the galley. He was simply handed champagne and almonds because he was in first class, and that was what happened to people in first class. The attendant returned the boarding pass to Naomi. She didn't apologize. She walked away. Naomi sat with her hands in her lap for the rest of the boarding process and through the safety demonstration and through the taxi and through the takeoff. She looked out the window and watched Newark get small beneath her and then disappear into cloud. She kept her posture straight. She kept her hands still. When they landed, she collected her bag from the overhead bin and walked through the terminal and sat in a chair near the baggage claim and cried. Not from humiliation, although humiliation was part of it. From rage. From the specific rage of having prepared for something perfectly and still been told in 100 unsaid ways that you didn't belong in it. She cried for 7 minutes. She timed it. Then she stopped. The rage didn't leave. She gave it an address. She put it inside ambition the way you put a fire inside a furnace, contained directed generating heat in a useful direction. She went home to her parents' apartment. She unpacked her bag. She sat at the kitchen table and wrote a question at the top of a piece of paper. What would I have to build to never feel that again? She didn't answer it that night, but she kept the paper. The second memory came faster, sharper. She was 27, a different city, a different kind of room. 14 people around a mahogany table in a private equity firm in Boston. She was the only black woman. She was the only person under 40. She was there because she had put together a $40 million acquisition proposal for a logistics company that the firm had been unable to close for 2 years. She had found the solution in the contract structure. She had written it up and sent it to a contact who had sent it to a senior partner who had invited her in. She walked into the room in a tailored blazer. She placed a copy of the proposal at each seat. She said good morning. The senior partner, 60s silver hair, the casually powerful posture of a man whose opinion of himself had never once been tested, looked at her across the table and said, "Could you make sure we have enough coffee before we start?" 14 people heard this. 2 of them laughed quietly. The rest looked at their proposals. Naomi paused for exactly 1 second. Then she walked to the credenza. She checked the coffee urn. She said, "The coffee is full." She returned to her seat. She sat down. She looked at the senior partner and said, "Shall I take you through the structure?" The deal closed 6 weeks later. Her firm received a 10% advisory fee on a $40 million transaction. The senior partner retired 2 years after that. She bought his firm 3 years after he retired. She restructured it. She kept the good people. She let everyone else go. That was her answer to the question she had written at the kitchen table the night she came home from the airport. You build until the rooms that tried to keep you out belong to you. Back in Seat 1A on Vantage. Flight 7, the engines hummed their long, steady note. The cabin lights were soft amber. The rain was far below them now, somewhere over the Atlantic, invisible. Naomi opened her eyes. She picked up her pen. She thought about the plastic cup still sitting on her tray table. She thought about Brett Calloway's posture when he set it down. She thought about Priya's frozen hand on the champagne bottle. She thought about the 7 complaints in Brett's file, all marked reviewed and no action taken. 7 passengers who had done what she was doing right now, who had sat in the seat and held it together and then gotten off the plane and gone home. And nothing had changed. That moment lived in her bones. Each one of them did. The flight attendant in Newark who asked if she was sure. The partner in Boston who asked for coffee. The 7 passengers whose complaints went nowhere. She looked at the top of the page. Vantage Airways, New Horizons Initiative. Day 1. She turned to the next page. She kept writing. The dinner service began at hour 2. The cabin had settled into cruise darkness. Window shades down across most of the seats, the overhead lights dimmed to their amber evening setting. The quiet engine hum, providing a kind of sonic privacy. It was the part of the flight where passengers became less careful about being observed. Brett stood at the forward galley entrance and reviewed the catering manifest with Melissa. He ran his finger down the protein selections. Steak. 4 portions remaining. Pasta primavera. Full supply. He tapped the steak line with 1 finger. He said to Melissa Handel, 1A, "Give her the pasta, don't offer the steak. We're running light on protein tonight." Melissa looked at this manifest. They had 4 steaks. There were currently 3 passengers who had selected steak on their pre-order preference. One of those 3 was the lobbyist who always changed his order at the last minute. In practice, they were almost certainly not running light on steak. Melissa said, "Got it." She assembled 1A's tray with the pasta. A vegetarian primavera, the option typically offered to passengers who had requested dietary alternatives at booking, which Naomi had not done. She carried it down the aisle. She said, "Good evening. I'm so sorry. The steak has been very popular tonight, and we've run through most of our supply." Naomi looked at the tray. She looked at the pasta. She looked at Melissa's name tag. Then she looked at Melissa directly. She said, "Melissa, is the steak actually gone, or is it not being offered to me?" Melissa went very still. The tray was in her hands. The question was in the air between them. She said, We're short on portions." Naomi said, "I see, write it down." Melissa said, "Excuse me?" "Naomi, on your service log, write down that 1A was served pasta due to steak unavailability. Timestamp it." Melissa opened her mouth, closed it. She set the tray down on the linen tablecloth and went back to the galley without looking at Naomi again. In the galley, she said nothing to Brett. Brett did not ask. Priya had been watching from her position near the rear service cart. She had seen Melissa carry the pasta forward. She had seen the non-offer. She had done the math on the remaining steaks herself earlier in the flight. She knew there was no shortage. She turned to the rear galley and found what she was looking for in the lower storage compartment. A half bottle of champagne sealed decent quality that had been loaded as overflow stock. Not the Dom, but cold, real, untouched. She wrapped her hand around it so the label faced her palm. She walked forward through the cabin, keeping close to the seat backs, angling her body so the bottle wasn't obvious from the galley entrance. She reached 1A. She set the bottle quietly beside Naomi's water glass without ceremony, without calling attention to it. She said, "I found this in the rear stock. It's cold." Naomi looked at it. Then she looked at Priya. She said, "What's your name?" Priya said, "Priya Sandoval, 4 months." Naomi said, "You're doing a good job, Priya." Priya nodded and turned to go back. Naomi said quietly just before she stepped away, "Remember something. The difference between leadership and just showing up is what you do when no one is requiring you to do the right thing." Priya carried those words back through the cabin. They were small and quiet, and they settled into her like something she had been waiting to hear without knowing she was waiting. Brett was at the galley entrance when she came through the curtain. He looked at her hands. He looked at the absence of the bottle. He said, "What did you give her?" "Priya." There was a half bottle of overflow stock in the lower rear compartment. It was already open. Would have gone to waste. "Brett, I told you pasta only." "Priya." It was a half bottle. It was open. It was going to be poured out. Brett said nothing for a moment. He looked at her with the expression of someone who is filing information for future use. Then he turned and went back to the service cart. Priya went back to her section. Her hands were steady. She wasn't sure how long they would stay that way. The bread service came 20 minutes later. Brett handled it himself. A deliberate choice, Priya noted, because Brett hadn't personally handled the bread in the 2 months she'd observed him on this route. He moved through first class with the basket offering each passenger individually. The lobbyist in 2F, Frank DeLuca in 1B, Rosa Fuentes in 3A. The 2 passengers in the window seats behind them. He passed seat 1A completely. Walked past it the way you walk past something you've decided isn't there. Naomi's tray sat with its pasta, its water, her half bottle of champagne, no bread. Frank DeLuca looked up from his newspaper. He watched Brett complete the service circuit and return to the galley. He waited 30 seconds. Then he leaned slightly toward the aisle, tilted the bread basket that had been left on his tray, and said to Naomi without preamble, "He's been doing this for 20 years, apparently. I've watched him treat 3 different passengers this way on 3 separate flights. You're not the first person to sit in 1A and get managed rather than served." "Naomi, what happened to the others, Frank?" "They got off the plane. Didn't say anything to anyone." He held out a piece of bread. She took it. He went back to his newspaper. After a moment, Naomi said, "I own the plane." Frank went very still, not dramatically. He didn't put the paper down. He didn't turn to look at her. He just stopped moving for a count of 3. Then he turned one page of the newspaper. He said, without inflection, "I had a feeling." He closed the newspaper. He did not reopen it. He shifted his seat angle slightly, a subtle, deliberate repositioning that placed him at the outer edge of his seat closer to the aisle in a position that would make it more difficult for someone to approach 1A from the front without passing through his personal space. He did not explain this adjustment. He simply made it. In row 3, a Rosa Fuentes had posted her first clip. 12 seconds of video angled carefully from her seat. The visible bread basket, passing seat 1A, without stopping. The Dom Perignon in the forward ice bucket, clearly untouched. No names, no voices, just the pattern. Her caption, "Watch the bread basket in first class. Count the seats it stops at, then count the ones it doesn't. Advantage Airways, I've been recording since boarding. This is a thread." The story went up on Instagram. Then she posted the clip to X. She tagged 3 aviation journalist accounts and 2 consumer rights organizations she followed. In 8 minutes, it had 1,400 views. She put her phone down. She ordered sparkling water from Priya, who brought it with both hands, and a quiet thank you for the tip from an hour ago that Rosa hadn't technically given yet, but apparently was about to. Naomi was still writing when the lights dimmed further for the sleep portion of the service. She had moved from the policy framework section to a subsection she had labeled personnel accountability, a working model. She wrote for 40 more minutes before she put the pen down and looked at the window. Outside was only dark and cloud and the occasional distant light of a ship far below on the Atlantic. She thought 7 complaints, all dismissed. She thought the bread basket passing the seat without stopping. She thought Priya's 4 months and her half bottle of overflow stock carried forward in the dark. She picked up her pen. She wrote merit review structure, not tenure-based. Character demonstrated under pressure is the metric. She underlined it. She kept writing. Hour 4. Most of the first-class cabin had shifted into the blurred horizontal stillness of mid-flight sleep. Window shades down. Seats reclined. The senator in 2F had been asleep for 90 minutes, his reading glasses still on his face. Frank DeLuca had his eyes closed, though Priya had noticed he hadn't put his earbuds in, which she associated in her experience with people who were listening rather than sleeping. Naomi had been writing for 2 hours. She had filled 11 pages in the notebook with a density that Priya had clocked passing by, not sprawling longhand, but tight organized text with headers and subpoints and bracketed notes. Not someone processing a difficult experience, someone building something. Naomi put the pen down. She stretched her neck. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. Brett was at the forward galley entrance, a position he had maintained for the last 40 minutes. He was speaking to Rick Harmon, the first officer who had come out for a mid-flight stretch. Rick was 39, lean, with the calm professional bearing of someone who had been trained to keep things contained and on schedule. He was not a bad person. He was the kind of person who deferred to the senior cabin crew's judgment on cabin matters because the organizational structure told him to, and who had not yet been required to examine what that deference cost other people. Brett saw Naomi stand. He watched her orientation, forward toward the lavatory. He moved. He reached the forward lavatory door before she did, positioning himself in front of it with a fluid, practiced ease that suggested he'd blocked corridors before. He said, "Forward lav is out of service. Plumbing issue caught late in our pre-flight check. You'll need to use the midship facilities in business class. Row 22 through the curtain." The occupied and vacant indicator above the lavatory door read vacant. The green light was illuminated. There was no maintenance notice on the door handle. There was no signage. There was nothing except Brett's body blocking the door and his voice telling her something was true that wasn't. Naomi looked at the green indicator. She said, "It says vacant, Brett." He said, "Indicator's faulty. We flagged it with maintenance but didn't get a pre-flight fix. It's a known issue on this aircraft." She said, "Has anyone filed a maintenance log for this flight indicating a forward lavatory defect?" Brett said, "I'm telling you there's a plumbing issue, ma'am." She said, "Use my name." He said, "Excuse me." She said, "My name is in the manifest. You've had it since the gate. You've called me ma'am and mom 4 times tonight. My name is Naomi. Use it." The air in the forward galley changed register. Rick Harmon, standing 2 steps away, shifted his weight. He looked at the lavatory indicator. He looked at Brett. He looked at Naomi. He did not say anything. Naomi turned to Rick directly. She said, "First officer, is it standard FAA practice to redirect a first-class passenger to the midship lavatory when the forward lavatory indicator reads vacant and no documented maintenance issue has been logged?" Rick said, "The senior purser has authority over cabin safety determinations." She said, "That's not what I asked." A beat of silence. Rick said, "The forward lavatory appears to be operational." He stepped to the side. He opened the lavatory door. He said, "You can use the forward lav. I apologize for any confusion." Brett's face did not move, but something behind it shifted, contracted, filed away. Naomi said, "Thank you, Rick." She went in. The door locked. Brett turned to Rick. He said with a control that was just barely containing its opposite, "You just stepped over me in front of a passenger." Rick said, low and even, "You were going to make her walk to row 22. That's not a safety call, Brett. That's a choice." Brett, "She is not a revenue passenger." Rick, "We don't know that." Brett, "I know it." Rick said nothing to that. He looked at Brett the way you look at a structural problem you haven't yet decided how to address. Then he turned and went back to the cockpit. He didn't say anything to Captain Okafor when he sat down. He picked up the flight log and reviewed the last entry. but he couldn't quite focus on the numbers. He kept seeing the green vacant light above the lavatory door and Brett's body in front of it. He filed it as something to watch. He didn't understand yet how much there was left to see. Naomi was in the lavatory for less than 4 minutes. When she came out, the forward galley was quiet. Brett was at the counter with his back partially turned, arranging something on the service tray with the focused attention of a man who is doing a small task in order to avoid looking like he's waiting. He was waiting. As she cleared the galley threshold, he turned. He moved to stand in her path. Not aggressively, nothing that would read as aggressive from a camera angle or a passing witness. Just a presence placed deliberately between her and her seat, close enough to be heard at a whisper. Close enough for the proximity itself to be a kind of pressure. He spoke quietly. He said, "You think that was clever, getting Rick on your side?" She stopped. She looked at him. He said, "I've been flying this route for 22 years. I've seen every version of this. Someone who gamed their way into a forward seat, deciding they know better than the crew, making alliances, playing victim." "I know what you are," she said. "And what am I, Brett?" He said, "You're not one of them." He gestured, a brief contemptuous tilt of the chin toward the first-class cabin. Toward the senator and the banker and the men whose names he knew. She said, "One of them." He said, "You know exactly what I mean." He leaned slightly closer. The edge in his voice dropped to something that was no longer professionally dressed at all. He said, "Ghetto lottery winners. You all look the same coming in. Dressed down quiet, waiting to cause a scene and cash in. Now get out of my face before I have the captain remove you before we land." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. She took one measured breath. She stepped around him. Not quickly, not demonstratively, just cleanly the way you step around an object in a hallway. She walked back to seat 1A with the same unhurried pace she had walked onto this plane with. She sat down. She put her hands flat on the notebook on her knee. She opened it to a clean page. She wrote 2 words, Brett Calloway. Then she drew a single line beneath the name. She clicked her pen closed. She reached to the console of seat 1A. The new entertainment system installed fleet-wide as part of a cabin safety upgrade she had reviewed and approved 3 weeks ago during the acquisition due diligence process. She looked at the small flush-mounted lens at the top of the screen panel. The indicator light was active. The cabin security feature, audio and video streaming to the company server since Wheels Up, was running. She had not told anyone to activate it. It had activated automatically at boarding the way it was designed to. It had been recording everything in the first-class cabin for the last 4 hours and 12 minutes. Every service round, every skipped breadbasket, every word in the forward galley, including this one. In 1B, Frank DeLuca's eyes were open. He had heard every word through the gap in his awareness that he'd been maintaining for the last 90 minutes. He said at standard conversation volume, not bothering to be discreet. "Did he say what I think he said?" "Naomi, yes. Frank, I'm a witness." "Naomi, I know." She pointed to the camera lens in the entertainment console. "But you won't be needed." She said it softly, almost to herself, smiled Brett. She looked back at her notebook. She turned to the page she'd been writing on and added a line at the bottom of the section she'd labeled Personnel Accountability, a working model. She wrote, "The camera has been running since boarding. Everything is already logged." She underlined it. Then she started a new section. Hour 5. The cabin was still mostly dark. Most passengers had their shades down and their screens off. The flight crew had dimmed the galley lights. It was the quiet hour, that long suspended middle of a transatlantic flight where nothing is supposed to happen and the Atlantic moves beneath you like something patient. Rosa Fuentes had not slept. She had her laptop open on her tray table. The brightness turned low and her phone propped against the seatback mount at an angle that looked casual from the aisle but was in fact precisely calibrated. In her 14 years of travel journalism, she had filed stories from 43 countries, survived a collapsed press conference in Singapore, been detained briefly at a border crossing in Eastern Europe over a story about airport security bias, and had developed as a result a very specific set of instincts about when something was worth recording and when something was worth broadcasting. This was the second kind. She opened Instagram Live. She titled it, "Something is very wrong on Vantage Flight 7. I've been recording since boarding." She spoke quietly into the phone, keeping her voice below the ambient engine noise, which gave the whole thing the particular intimacy of a whispered confidence. She said, "I want to walk you through what I've documented on this flight. I'm not naming passengers. I'm showing you a pattern." She shared the pre-departure clip, 12 seconds the Dom Perignon in the ice bucket, Priya's hand on the bottle, Brett's hand closing around Priya's wrist. She said, "That is a flight attendant physically stopping a junior crew member from serving a first-class passenger a glass of champagne. The passenger is a black woman in seat 1A. The crew member who stopped it is a senior purser who has been on this route for 22 years. She shared the breadbasket clip. She counted the seats aloud. 2F yes, 1B yes, 3A yes, 1A no. She said, "Not an accident. Watch it 3 times and tell me that's an accident." She played the 12-second galley clip she had captured of Brett's body blocking the lavatory door, his posture the green vacant indicator visible in the upper corner of the frame, Naomi's stillness in the corridor. She didn't have the audio of what was said in the galley, but she had the shape of it. She said, "That indicator reads vacant. He's blocking the forward lavatory and redirecting her to business class. On this airline, in first class, because of a plumbing issue that apparently doesn't exist." She looked into the camera. She said, "I've been a travel journalist for 14 years. I've filed 100 complaints that went nowhere. I've written stories about bias in aviation that airlines ignored and responded to with boilerplate about their commitment to inclusion. I'm not writing a story tonight. I'm showing you what I'm watching in real time." Viewer count at the 6-minute mark, 3,100. By 12 minutes, 18,400. Comments were moving faster than she could read them. "This is disgusting. Which airline? I can see the tail livery through the window. That's Vantage. Someone tweet the airline directly. She's just sitting there writing. That woman is extraordinary. I've had this happen to me on a different carrier. Never said anything. Is anyone going to do anything?" Rosa said. Someone asked if anyone is going to do anything. Here's what I'll tell you. The woman in 1A has been doing something since the moment this started. She hasn't raised her voice once. She is sitting in her seat right now, writing in a notebook, and she is the most composed person in this cabin. I don't know who she is, but I know what she is. She is not someone who needs me to save her. At 19 minutes, a clip from Rosa's story, the breadbasket video with her count of the seats, was reposted to X by an aviation journalist with 400,000 followers. The caption read, "This is on Vantage Flight 7 right now. Senior purser skipping the same seat every service round. The passenger is a black woman in first class. At Vantage Airways, explain this." The hashtag Vantage Airways began trending in the U.S. Within 40 minutes, it was trending in the UK. In Chicago, at Vantage Airways headquarters, the corporate social media team had been getting automated alerts since Rosa's first story post. But it was the trending hashtag that triggered the escalation protocol. A junior manager named Tommy pulled up the Flight 7 manifest on his screen. He looked at seat 1A. He typed the name into the company's internal record system. The result loaded. Tommy stared at it for 3 full seconds. Then he called his supervisor. He said, "You need to come look at this." His voice had the particular quality of someone who has just understood something they cannot ununderstand. His supervisor came. She looked at the screen. She said, "Oh no." She picked up the phone and called Oliver Marsh, the UK station director, who was in his car on the way to the office for the early shift. Oliver answered. She said his name. She said, "Flight 7, seat 1A. I'm sending you the file right now." Oliver's phone buzzed. He looked at the name on the file she had sent. He pulled the car to the side of the road. He sat there for a moment. Then he said, "Get the full executive welcome team to Gate 7, full honors, and tell them to move fast." Carla Ibanez, Naomi's EA, had been monitoring Rosa's live stream for the last 23 minutes from her apartment in Midtown Manhattan, where it was still late night. She had forwarded 3 clips to Naomi's personal number with a running commentary. She sent a final message. "It's on X Vantage. Airways is trending. Rosa Fuentes has 41,000 live viewers right now. You're going to land to a full reception whether you wanted it or not. Naomi read the message. She set the phone face down on the tray table. She looked at the ceiling of the cabin for a moment. The soft amber of the cruise lighting the clean walnut trim, the quiet evidence of everything she had just agreed to be responsible for. Then she picked up her pen. She wrote social media as accountability infrastructure, the role of public documentation in institutional change. Not a replacement for policy, a forcing function for it. She underlined forcing function. In the galley, Melissa had shown Brett her phone, the breadbasket clip, Brett's face, the trending hashtag. Brett stared at it. He said, "That's the journalist in 3A, Melissa said. "She's been recording since boarding Brett. She has everything." Brett put the phone down. He picked up the interphone. He dialed the cockpit. Captain Okafor answered. Brett said with the practiced evenness of someone who had constructed this sentence in his head, "Captain, this is the cabin. The passenger in 1A has been increasingly disruptive. She's been hostile to crew throughout the flight. I'm concerned about the situation upon landing. I may need to request authorities meet us at the gate." There was a pause on the line. Then Okafor said, "Understood, Brett. I'll note the report." He said nothing else. He hung up. In the cockpit, Rick Harmon looked at him. Okafor put the phone down. He said, "Close the door." Rick closed it. Okafor turned to his screen. He navigated to the crew management system. He typed Hayles N, seat 1A. He read what came back. He read it again. He said, "Rick, look at this." Rick looked. Silence. Rick said Brett just called her a security risk. Okafor, "Yes, he did." Rick said nothing for a moment. "Then what do we do?" Okafor said, "We land the plane, and we let what's coming come." Outside, somewhere below the clouds, the Atlantic moved in the dark. Patient, enormous, indifferent to all of it. Priya was standing at the galley curtain again. She had developed a habit of standing there during the quiet hours. Not eavesdropping, not watching for something to go wrong, just orienting herself toward the forward cabin, the way you orient yourself toward a window when the room feels too small. She was looking at Naomi in seat 1A, the woman in the hoodie with the notebook still writing at hour 5, the pen moving with the same measured rhythm it had maintained since takeoff. Priya had been trying to understand something about that rhythm, about how a person maintains that kind of steadiness inside an experience that would have undone most people 2 hours ago. She thought, what do you have to have lived through to sit like that? She didn't know the answer. But in seat 1, Naomi did. She was 32. She had been in the industry for 5 years, long enough to have learned the language, and short enough to still be surprised by the distances between what institutions said about themselves and what they did when no one was watching. She was on a transatlantic flight, different carrier business class, a reward for closing the firm's first transaction over $100 million. She had worked 60-hour weeks for 8 months to close that deal. She was exhausted in the way that follows real effort, the good kind, the kind that sits in your body like something earned. She was dressed professionally. Navy blazer, clean trousers, good shoes. She had her laptop open and a drink ordered. And she was, for the first time in 8 months, allowing herself a specific kind of quiet. The kind that comes when the work is done and the result was right and you can finally let your shoulders drop. A flight attendant appeared. She looked at Naomi. She said, "I'm sorry to bother you. Can I just double-check your boarding pass? We've had some ticketing issues and I want to make sure you're in the right section." Naomi showed the pass. The attendant looked at it. She said, Just a moment." She walked to the forward galley. Naomi waited. The attendant returned. She said, "I just need to verify with my colleague." "1 second." Naomi waited. A second flight attendant appeared. He looked at the boarding pass. He looked at Naomi. He said, "Everything looks fine. Sorry about that." Neither of them apologized in a way that acknowledged what the apology was actually for. Naomi had her drink. She had her seat. She opened her laptop. She looked at the screen for a moment without seeing it. Directly across the aisle, a man in a polo shirt sat with a full glass of champagne and a cheese plate that had appeared without him requesting it and without anyone asking him to verify anything at all about who he was or whether he belonged there. Naomi closed her laptop. She took a notebook from her bag. She wrote a question at the top of the page. She wrote it in the same clean block letters she used for all her most important questions. How much does it cost to own an airline? She wrote it not in anger, though the anger was there had always been. There had been there since Newark and Boston and 100 smaller moments that didn't have names but had weight. She wrote it as a practical question, as the next logical step in a strategy she had been building for 10 years without knowing quite what it was building toward. Now she knew. She spent the rest of the flight doing research on her phone. Industry valuations, acquisition histories, capital requirements, regulatory frameworks. She filled 4 pages of the notebook by the time they landed. When she walked off the plane, she didn't say anything to the crew. She went through customs. She found a coffee shop. She sat down and opened the notebook to the first page and looked at the question. Then she started writing the answer. It took her 6 years to build the capital structure. It took her 3 more to identify the right acquisition target. It took her 11 months to negotiate the terms. And 18 hours ago, she had signed the final page of the agreement that transferred the Vantage Airways Group. Every aircraft, every route, every crew member on every flight, including this one, into her portfolio. She had gotten on Flight 7 because she believed a CEO who stops flying commercial loses the truth of what the product is. She had told her transition team, "I need to see the inside before I announce the outside." She had seen it, back in seat 1. The pen still in her hand, the engine note steady beneath her. Naomi thought, "I am not here to punish anyone. I am not here to make a point. I am here because 11 passengers filed complaints and the structure buried them, and the only way to know that the structure will change is to be the person who changes it." She thought about Priya's 4 months and the cold half-bottle carried forward in the dark. She thought about the 7-year-old girl in Newark who ironed a second-hand blazer 3 times and asked for champagne and got something else entirely. She thought day 1. She wrote, "The measure of a new culture is not the announcement. It is the first ordinary flight after the announcement when no one is watching for it. That is when you find out if anything actually changed." She drew a box around it. She kept writing. Hour 6. The service carts had been stowed. The cabin was at its deepest sleep cycle. The senator fully horizontal, the banker's screen dark, the overhead lighting reduced to its minimum of faint warm line along the floor panels. The engines were steady. The Atlantic was somewhere below. London was 3 hours ahead. In the rear galley, with the curtain drawn and Melissa standing at his elbow, Brett Calloway was building something. He had his incident tablet open. He typed with 2 fingers and total conviction, the way people type when they are not composing but transcribing, writing down what they already believe to be true and giving it the formatting of documentation. At the top of the incident form in the subject line, he typed, "Level 2, Disruptive Passenger, Seat 1A, Flight 7. Level 2 was the designation for incidents involving potential physical threat or behavior serious enough to warrant law enforcement response at the destination airport. Submitting a Level 2 report triggered an automatic notification to Heathrow's port security team. It also generated a formal record in the airline's safety database that could be used to ban a passenger from future flights. Brett had used Level 2 3 times in his 22 years. Each time the passenger had been removed or detained. He began to type. He wrote that the passenger in Seat 1A had been intoxicated on boarding. He used the phrase appeared disoriented and unsteady, which was a lie, but a soft one, the kind that cannot be definitively disproved without footage. He wrote that she had refused repeated crew instructions regarding the lavatory, technically referencing a real interaction reframed to place all fault on one side. He wrote that she had verbally threatened the senior purser in the forward galley. Naomi's 3-word responses and her pointed silences rendered as aggression, her composure rendered as menace. And then he wrote the line that would become the centerpiece of what followed. The passenger physically shoved the senior purser in the forward galley area near the lavatory in an apparent attempt to force entry to the secured facility. Crew witnessed the incident. He had not been shoved. There had been no contact. There had been a woman stepping around him with the deliberate calm of someone who understood exactly what she was doing in a space that a camera she didn't know he'd forgotten about had been recording for 6 hours. He showed the tablet to Melissa. He said, "You saw her push me right near the lavatory when Rick got involved." Melissa had been in the rear cabin during the lavatory exchange. She had seen nothing. but she understood the equation that Brett was presenting to her. If Brett went down, the incident report, the recording, the trending hashtag, the investigation that would follow, she had signed the breadbasket service log that showed 1A was skipped. She was already in this whether she chose to be or not. She told herself, I didn't see anything, but I didn't see it wasn't true. She told herself, I've been on this crew for 2 years and nothing like this has ever happened before. She told herself what she needed to tell herself to pick up the stylus. She signed the witness line. Brett submitted the report. The tablet confirmed transmission, ground operations Heathrow, received. Corporate security, received. ACARS system relay, confirmed. He closed the tablet. He set it down on the galley counter. He rolled his shoulders back. He had the particular expression of a man who has converted uncertainty into action and is now waiting for the structure he has served for 22 years to respond in kind. In the forward galley, out of Brett's line of sight, Priya had heard the sounds of the interaction through the thin galley partition. Not the words, but the rhythm of it. The low two-voice exchange, the silence that followed. The single sound of something being set down. She had been with this crew long enough to know the difference between normal end-of-service quiet and the quiet that follows a decision. She went to the rear galley on the pretense of restocking. Brett was in the forward section by then. Melissa was at the counter facing away, her posture, the exact shape of someone who has done something they are already trying to stop thinking about. Priya picked up the rear service log. She looked at it. She put it down. She took her own phone from her jacket pocket. She typed a message to the Vantage crew base manager at JFK time-stamped clear. She typed, "This is Priya Sandoval, Flight 7, currently en route to Heathrow. I need to formally note for the record that I did not witness any physical contact or aggressive behavior from the passenger in seat 1A at any point during this flight. I have been present in the forward cabin for the majority of service. I was asked to participate in service decisions I believe were discriminatory. I declined. I am documenting this prior to landing." She sent it to the base manager. She sent a copy to the Vantage Crew Relations Department. She put the phone back in her pocket. She thought, 4 months in, and this is the most important thing I've done. She stood in the rear galley for a moment with her hands at her sides. Then she thought of something Naomi had said to her 2 hours ago. The difference between leadership and just showing up is what you do when no one is requiring you to do the right thing. She went back to the forward galley. In the cockpit, the ACARS printer churned. Captain Okafor tore the printout from the thermal roll and read it once. He read it again. His expression didn't change. He placed it on the instrument panel beside the navigation display. Rick looked over. He read it. He said he filed a level 2 against her. "Okafor, yes," Rick said. "The entire reason there will be officers at the gate is because Brett called her a physical threat." Okafor, yes. A long moment. Outside the cockpit windows, the darkness of the Atlantic was beginning to give way to the first gray suggestion of pre-dawn light, that particular color of sky that only exists for 20 minutes before it decides to become morning. Rick said, "And she knows that's going to happen." Okafor said, "She told her assistant not to send security. She said let it develop." Rick absorbed this. He said, "She's known the whole time, and she just kept writing in that notebook." Okafor said nothing. He watched the horizon begin to separate itself from the water. Hour 6.5. 45 minutes had passed since Melissa signed the witness line on Brett's report. She had gone back to the mid-cabin section and performed the final water service and the blanket check with her hands steady and her face arranged in the neutral, practiced expression she had spent 5 years developing. But underneath it, something was running in a direction she couldn't control. She kept coming back to one thing, not the ethics of it, not yet. The fact. She had signed a document that said she had witnessed something. She had not witnessed it. She had signed it anyway because Brett asked and because not signing felt like a wall she wasn't equipped to climb. But the document existed now. It had been transmitted. If there was an investigation, and Rosa Fuentes had 41,000 people watching a live stream, so there was going to be an investigation, the document would be part of it. And she had put her name on a lie. She went to the rear galley at the 20-minute mark of her internal loop and found Priya restocking the dessert tray from the lower cart. Priya didn't look up when Melissa came in. She had a way of focusing on the task in front of her that Melissa had noticed before and interpreted as indifference, but now understood was something more like discipline. Melissa said, "Did she do anything?" Priya looked up. She said, "Who?" Melissa 1A. Did she actually push him? Priya straightened. She held the dessert tray in both hands and looked at Melissa. She said, "You signed the report." It wasn't a question. Melissa saw that Priya already knew. Had known probably from the moment she heard the rear galley exchange through the partition. Melissa said Brett needed a second witness. Priya, did she or didn't she? A long moment. The engines ran their steady note beneath the silence. Melissa said no. She's been the stillest person on this plane. Priya, then you just signed a false document against an innocent passenger, Melissa said. If Brett goes down, the investigation catches everything. The bread service, the steak, the champagne. I was part of it, Priya. I don't have a clean record in this. Priya set the dessert tray down on the counter. She said, "So your plan is to add a false witness statement to a discrimination record and hope neither one comes up." Melissa didn't answer. Priya said, "The difference between where you are right now and where you're going to be when this plane lands is one decision. You can go to the report system right now and retract your witness statement. You can say you signed without being present for the incident. That's still bad, but it's survivable. What you just described, it's not." Melissa said, "He'll know." Priya, "He's going to know a lot of things when we land. The question is whether you're standing next to him when he finds out or standing somewhere else." Melissa looked at the galley wall. She looked at her hands. She looked at Priya. She said, "You already filed something, didn't you?" Priya said, "Yes." Melissa was quiet for a long moment. The plane moved through the pre-dawn sky. The galley light was the particular slightly blue-tinged white of an hour too early for natural warmth. She said, "What do I do?" Priya, "Open the incident management system. Go to the report Brett submitted 45 minutes ago. Find your witness signature entry. File an amendment. Write exactly what you just told me, that you signed without witnessing the incident, that Brett asked you to sign and you complied without observing the event in question, that you are retracting the witness statement and requesting a corrected record." Melissa said, "He'll say I'm lying now." Priya, "There's footage, Melissa. There's been footage since Wheels Up. Brett doesn't know about it. But it exists. Whatever you write in that amendment, the footage will confirm it." Melissa went very still. She said, "What footage?" Priya said, "The new cabin security system. Seat console cameras in first class. Installed fleet-wide in the last 90 days. Audio and video, running since boarding." Melissa stared at her. Then she turned to the incident tablet on the rear galley counter. She picked it up. Her hands were not entirely steady. She opened the system. She found the report. She found the witness signature section. She pressed File Amendment. She typed for 4 minutes. She said what Priya had told her to say. She said it plainly in the plain language of someone who is not trying to be impressive but is trying to be accurate. She submitted it. The system confirmed the amendment had been logged. She put the tablet down. She said, "That's it." Priya, "That's it." Melissa said, "I don't know if it helps." Priya, "It helps more than not doing it." She picked up the dessert tray. She went back to the front of the cabin. Melissa stayed in the rear galley for another 3 minutes looking at the tablet, the amendment confirmation on the screen. Then she straightened up. She smoothed her uniform. She went back to work. She didn't look at Brett when she passed him in the forward galley. He was standing at his usual position with his arms folded, watching the descent announcement prepare to activate. He looked satisfied. He looked like a man who has set something in motion and is waiting to watch it arrive. He had no idea what had already arrived without him. Captain Douglas Okafor had been flying for 28 years. He had landed in 41 countries. He had handled 2 emergency declarations, one system's failure at 31,000 feet over the North Sea, and a medical emergency that required an unscheduled landing in Newfoundland during a January blizzard. He was not a man who was easily unsettled, but there was a quality to the stillness he felt after reading the crew management system record for Seat 1A that was different from professional calm. It was the stillness of someone who has just understood the exact shape of what they are inside. He had typed the name from the ACARS notification into the system 18 minutes ago. Standard verification, the same thing he did whenever a crew member flagged a passenger for law enforcement contact. He believed in due diligence. He believed in checking the data before acting on a report. The data had come back. Hayles Naomi R. Executive Access, Vantage Airways Group, CEO and Chairwoman Mercer Hayles Capital. Acquisition of Vantage Airways Group effective as of yesterday, 1400 hours Eastern Time, flying to London Heathrow to announce to the European Division. Under strict press embargo until the 9 a.m. briefing. He had read it twice. He had set it on the instrument panel and looked at it the way you look at a document that is about to require you to do something. Then the ACARS printer had produced the response from Chicago, which he had requested without specifying why. Chicago had sent it anyway because Chicago had already seen the manifest, already made the same discovery, and had been waiting for someone in the operational chain to make contact. The message read, "Passenger identity confirmed at highest level. Stand by for Gate 7. Reception full executive team per station director's coordination. Per Ms. Hales's direct instruction, maintain normal operations. Do not interfere. Do not alert crew." He read the last 4 words twice. Do not alert crew. She had told them not to warn Brett. She had told them to let the flight proceed to its natural conclusion. She was sitting in seat 1A, writing in her notebook, letting the man who had spent 6 hours attempting to diminish her walk all the way to the gate before the floor fell out. That was, Okafor thought, a particular kind of composure. He turned to Rick. Rick had been quiet since reading the file. He was looking at the descent data on his instrument panel with the careful attention of a first officer who is processing something that has no precedent in his training manual. Okafor said, "He filed a level 2 against the owner of the airline." Rick, yes. Okafor, he is currently expecting officers to board the plane at Heathrow and detain her. Rick, yes. Okafor, and she told them not to tell us. She told them to let it play out. Rick said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "She's been doing this the whole flight, hasn't she?" The notebook, the calm. She wasn't just enduring it. Okafor number, she was documenting it. Rick looked at the flight log. He looked at the Brett Calloway Level 2 report that had printed 43 minutes ago. He said I should have corrected the lavatory situation earlier. I saw it. I knew the indicator was valid. I said something eventually, but I waited. Okafor, yes. Rick, that goes in my record. Okafor. It does. I won't be the one to obscure it. Rick nodded. He accepted this. Okafor sent a priority ACARS message to Chicago passenger identity confirmed cockpit level. Level 2 crew report filed against Ms. Hayles is inconsistent with all available evidence. No legitimate basis for law enforcement contact. Will maintain normal operations per instruction. Crew is unaware. Chicago responded in 6 minutes confirmed. Oliver Marsh and full executive welcome team confirmed for Gate 7. Ms. Hayles has been updated. Proceed as normal. Priya was in the forward galley when the interphone buzzed. She answered it. Okafor's voice level and measured. He said, "This is the captain. I need to make you aware, and only you, no other cabin crew, that the passenger in seat 1A is known to us. I cannot share details. What I can tell you is that your conduct on this flight has been noted at the highest level and will be documented as commendable. Whatever happens at the gate, do not be afraid." Priya said, "Understood, Captain." The line went quiet. She held the interphone for a moment before replacing it on the wall mount. She went to the curtain gap and looked at seat 1A. Naomi was still there, the notebook open, the pen in her hand, the worn Converse on the footrest. The Dom Perignon from the flight's original ice bucket had never been opened. The plastic cup from earlier was long cleared from the tray table. Priya thought about what the captain had just said. She thought about the 4 months. She thought about the cold half bottle she had carried forward in the dark because it was the right thing to do and no one was requiring her to do it. She thought it was enough. Whatever came next, it had been enough. The descent announcement chimed. Brett emerged from the rear galley with the satisfied, fully assembled posture of a man who is prepared for a performance. He moved to the forward galley and picked up the interphone to make the arrival announcement in his smoothest service voice. He looked ahead at the cockpit door. He looked at Priya. He said, "We're going to land, and this is going to be handled. You're going to see how 22 years of good standing looks when it counts." Priya said nothing. He made the announcement. He began collecting the final service items from the cabin. He was efficient. He was professional. He was completely certain of what was waiting for him at Gate 7. He had been certain all night. That was the through line. From the manifest at the gate to the plastic cup to the bread basket to the lavatory door to the words in the galley to the report on the tablet, Brett Calloway had been certain of every single thing all the way to the end. The wheels hit the runway at Heathrow with the standard jolt of a full landing, the reverse thrust roaring up through the fuselage. Brett stood at the forward door, arms folded, facing the cabin. He looked like a man expecting to win. He had no idea what was on the other side of that door. The landing announcement came from Captain Okafor directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We have arrived at London Heathrow Gate 7. We ask that all passengers remain seated with seat belts fastened. We will be holding briefly at the gate before deplaning may begin. We apologize for any delay, and thank you for flying Vantage." The murmur that moved through the cabin was quiet and slightly uncertain. The specific register of passengers who have been on a long flight and are now being told to sit still when everything in them wants to move. A few people checked their phones. The lobbyist in 2F sighed audibly. The senator had woken up and was blinking at his watch. Brett stood at the forward cabin door in the posture he had been preparing since he filed the report. Back straight, expression arranged into something between professional concern and vindicated authority. He had rehearsed what he was going to say to the officers when they boarded. He had rehearsed the concern in his voice, the tremor of a man who had been through something frightening. He was in this respect a skilled performer. 22 years of first-class service required a certain quality of theater. The jet bridge extended. The door unlocked. Brett opened it. The cool, damp air of a London morning swept in. The particular quality of Heathrow air, which carries the faint underscore of jet fuel in the gray patience of English weather. Brett stepped back to allow the first person through. 2 officers in high-visibility vests stepped aboard. Behind them came a tall man in a perfectly pressed navy suit, mid-50s, gold Vantage Airways pin on his lapel clipboard under one arm. Behind him, a woman with a tablet and the focused, efficient bearing of someone who has prepared for exactly this moment. Behind her, 2 more Vantage staff in corporate attire. Brett pointed toward 1A. He said, "Officers, thank you for responding. The passenger in seat 1A has been hostile and non-compliant throughout the flight. She physically assaulted a senior crew member, and I have a level 2 report." The man in the navy suit walked past him. He did not look at Brett. He did not slow. He moved through the first-class cabin with the directional certainty of someone who knows exactly where they are going, past the lobbyist in 2F, whose mouth was slightly open, past Frank DeLuca in 1B, who had been awake for the last 40 minutes waiting for this, past the other passengers until he reached seat 1A. He stopped. He bowed his head. A deep, full bow of genuine respect. He said, "Ms. Hayles, welcome to London. I'm Oliver Marsh, Station Director for Vantage UK. On behalf of the entire European division, we are honored to receive you. I am deeply sorry for what I understand has been an entirely unacceptable experience on this flight." The cabin absorbed this the way a room absorbs a sound that doesn't match its previous acoustics. Frank DeLuca stopped breathing for a moment. Rosa Fuentes' phone was out. The senator sat fully upright and removed his reading glasses. The lobbyist looked from Oliver to seat 1A and back again. Brett stood at the forward door and felt something leave his body. Not his confidence, that would come later. What left first was his certainty. The absolute 22-year bedrock of his certainty that he knew this cabin and everyone in it. He said, "Ms. Hayles." His voice did a thing it had never done in his professional life. It lost its practiced quality. It became just a voice. Naomi stood up. She was wearing the Yale hoodie she had boarded in 7.5 hours ago. The worn Converse. The battered leather notebook was in her hand. She stood up from seat 1A the way someone stands when they have been sitting in a seat that belongs to them and are simply choosing now to be on their feet. She was not tall. She was not imposing in any physical sense. But the moment she stood, the air in the cabin reorganized around her. Everyone in the space reoriented without being told to in her direction. She said, "Thank you, Oliver. I wish I could tell you the flight was pleasant." "Oliver, We received the communication from your assistant. We have the full executive team ready for your 9 o'clock briefing. The room is prepared. Brett stepped forward. His voice was coming back in the wrong way. Too high, too fast. He said, "Sir, I don't know who you believe this woman is, but I filed a level 2 report. She assaulted." Oliver Marsh turned his head, only his head, slowly. He looked at Brett's hand, which had reached toward his arm in a bid for attention. He looked at the hand the way you look at something that has no business being where it is. Then he looked up at Brett's face. He said, "Mr. Calloway, remove your hand." Brett recoiled. He said, "I'm the senior purser on this flight. I have 22 years. Oliver, I am aware of your file, Mr. Calloway. I would strongly suggest you stop speaking." Brett said, "I have a report. I have a witness." He was still speaking because there was nothing left to do but speak. He understood at some animal level below comprehension that the room had turned, but he couldn't stop reaching for the version of events where he had the authority. He had operated from that position for 22 years. He didn't know how to stand somewhere else. Naomi stepped out into the aisle. She faced Brett directly. She was shorter than him. She did not close the distance in a way that was confrontational. She simply existed in the space unafraid of the proximity which had the effect of making Brett's height feel irrelevant. She said, "My name is Naomi Hayles. My private equity firm, Mercer Hayles Capital, finalized the acquisition of Vantage Airways Group 18 hours ago. I am the new chief executive officer and chairwoman of the board of this airline." She let that sit in the air for a moment. She said, "I am the person who signs your paycheck." She tilted her head slightly. She said, or rather I was. The silence that followed was the specific total silence of a room in which every person has just understood something at the same moment. Even the rain on the terminal roof seemed to pause. From 3. Rosa Fuentes' phone was live. She was no longer narrating. She was just holding it up, recording, because what was happening in front of her needed no narration. Her viewer count read 94,200. Frank DeLuca in 1B began to clap. It was a slow, measured clap. Not triumphant, not theatrical, just the sound of a man affirming something. The lobbyist joined. 3 other passengers followed. The senator looked at Naomi and nodded once with the slow deliberateness of someone who has seen authority in many forms and is recognizing it now in an unfamiliar one. Brett looked around the cabin. He was looking for someone to support him. For 22 years, the cabin had been his. The passengers had deferred to him, the junior crew had followed him. The systems had processed his reports and closed his complaints. He looked around for the version of this room he had always operated in. It wasn't there anymore. He said, "I didn't know." His voice was very small. "Naomi. That is exactly the point, Brett." She said it without cruelty. Clearly, simply the way you state a fact that is both obvious and necessary. You don't get to treat people with dignity only when you know who they are. You failed that test before this plane left the ground. Melissa from the galley doorway had been standing there for 3 minutes. She had heard the exchange from the galley and known from the moment Oliver Marsh walked past Brett without looking at him what was happening. She had been standing at the edge of a decision for the last 40 minutes. Now the decision had arrived at her position, and she didn't need to go looking for it. She said clearly into the cabin, "I need to retract my witness statement. I didn't witness any physical contact. Brett asked me to sign the report, and I did it without having seen the incident. I am retracting it. I filed an amendment 40 minutes ago." Her voice shook, but it was clear. Brett turned to her. He said her name. She said, "I'm sorry," to Naomi directly. "I let it happen. That's on me." Brett said Melissa. "Oliver Marsh," said Mr. Calloway. He said it once quietly with a finality that closed the room around Brett's name. He turned to the 2 officers. "Officers Vantage Airways is formally requesting Mr. Calloway be escorted from the aircraft. His employment is terminated effective immediately. We will be pressing charges for filing a false police report and falsifying a crew safety document." Brett said, "You can't. I have a union. I have seniority. I have 22. One of the officers moved to his side. Brett stopped speaking, not because he had decided to, because he had run out of the one thing that had always kept him going. He had run out of certainty. As the officers took his arms and began moving him toward the door, he looked back. He looked at the first-class cabin for the last time. The leather seats, the walnut trim, the amber lighting, the space that had been his kingdom. He looked at Priya, who was standing at the galley curtain with her hands at her sides and her face composed. He looked at Rosa filming from 3A. He looked at Frank DeLuca, who had gone back to reading his newspaper. He looked at seat 1, A empty now. Naomi's battered notebook on the seat. Naomi watched him reach the door. She said quietly in a voice that didn't need to be loud because the room was still, "Enjoy the plastic cup, Brett." She did not watch him go. She had already turned to Oliver. The deplaning began slowly, the way things do after an event that has changed the temperature of a space. People moved carefully, as if the cabin were still holding something fragile. The lobbyist in 2F gathered his belongings without making eye contact with anyone. The senator paused at the aisle and looked at Naomi once with an expression she recognized. The expression of someone who had witnessed something and was deciding how much of it they were going to carry with them. He gave a brief nod. Then he moved toward the door. Frank DeLuca did not move quickly. He folded his newspaper with the deliberate patience of a man who is not in a hurry because he has decided that this specific moment deserves his full attention. He stood. He adjusted his jacket. He picked up his briefcase. Then he walked to seat 1A. He held out his hand. Naomi took it. He shook it once. Firm, brief, the handshake of a person who means what the gesture means. He said, "Hell of a flight." Naomi. It was something. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. He held it out. He said, "I've sat on 4 boards in my career. I know what leadership under pressure looks like, and I know what it looks like when someone is faking it. You were not faking it. If you ever need a board member who's seen the inside of this industry's worst habits from the passenger side, call me." Naomi took the card. She said, "I'll be in touch, Frank." He nodded. He walked toward the door. At the threshold, he turned once and looked back at the cabin, the same look people give a room when they know they're going to remember it. Then he was gone. Rosa Fuentes came last. She had her phone in her hand, but the screen was dark. She was not filming. She stood in the aisle and looked at Naomi, and both women registered something in each other that didn't require words. The specific recognition between people who have been watching the same thing for different reasons and with different tools, and have arrived at the same understanding. Rosa said, "I've been a travel journalist for 14 years. I've filed 100 complaints that went nowhere. I've written about this pattern on 6 different carriers and received 6 different boilerplate responses about commitment to inclusion. I want you to know, I wasn't filming to save you. I was filming because the truth needed a witness." Naomi said, "You didn't save me. You made sure it couldn't be denied." "Rosa, I'm going to write about this." Naomi, "I know. It's more than okay." She paused. "The transparency is part of the strategy. We're not going to bury the footage. We're going to release it." Rosa looked at her for a moment. She said, "That's not how airlines usually handle this." "Naomi, I know, that's the point." Rosa left. The cabin was nearly empty now. Oliver Marsh stood at a respectful distance with his tablet, allowing Naomi the space to work through the people before moving to the organizational agenda. The Vantage corporate staff waited behind him. Beyond the cabin door, the sounds of the gate area, the muffled PA announcements, the rolling of luggage wheels, the particular acoustic environment of Heathrow Terminal 3, filtered in through the jet bridge. Naomi turned. Priya was at the galley curtain. She hadn't left her position. She was waiting with the particular stillness of someone who does not know what they are waiting for but understands that leaving would be the wrong thing to do. Naomi walked to her. Priya straightened. She said, "Ms. Hayles, I'm sorry. I should have done more. I should have pushed back earlier. I should have—" Naomi said, "Priya." Priya stopped. Naomi said, "You brought me a cold champagne when no one required you to. You told the truth in your incident note when it would have been much easier not to. You stood in the galley with 4 months of experience and refused to participate in something wrong when the person who controlled your career was standing next to you asking you to." Priya's eyes went wet. She held them. Naomi said, "Do you know what bravery actually feels like from the inside?" Priya said no. Naomi, It feels exactly like what you described. It feels like being scared and doing it anyway because the alternative is being the kind of person who didn't. She turned to Oliver. She said, "Make a note. Priya Sandoval is to be fast-tracked for senior purser review. Immediately. I want her in the new higher hospitality training program as a lead instructor, not in 6 months. Now." Oliver wrote it down without expression, which was its own kind of expression. Priya said, "I've only been here 4 months. Naomi Integrity doesn't have a tenure requirement. You have it. That's the whole qualification." She held Priya's gaze for a moment, then she turned to the door. Rick Harmon was standing at the cockpit threshold. He had been there for several minutes, close enough to have heard the exchange with Priya, far enough to be giving everyone else their space. He stepped forward when Naomi turned. He said, "Ms. Hayles, I want to tell you directly. I didn't correct the lavatory situation when I should have. I saw the indicator. I knew it was valid. I waited. That was wrong, and it goes in my record." Naomi looked at him. She said, "Yes, it does." He nodded. He expected nothing from that, and that was appropriate. She said, "The difference between you and Brett Calloway isn't that you made a different choice in the moment. It's that you're standing here saying this. That's not nothing." She moved past him into the jet bridge. Oliver fell into step beside her. He walked and talked simultaneously, a man used to delivering operational information in motion. He said, "Brett Calloway's charges are being processed by the Port Authority, filing a false police report, falsifying a crew safety document, gross misconduct. The airline is filing a civil suit in parallel. Melissa Dorff is suspended pending review. She filed the witness retraction 40 minutes before landing, which will be noted. Rick Harmon receives a formal written notice. All 3 are removed from Flight 7 service and suspended from operations pending investigation." Naomi listened without slowing. He said, "Legal is preparing documentation. HR has been notified. The union rep for Calloway's section has been informed of the charges." Naomi pulled the full complaint history for Brett Calloway. Every passenger complaint filed against him in the past 5 years. Every single one that was reviewed and closed without action. "I want a number," Oliver said. "We already pulled it, 11 complaints. Going back to 2019. Naomi stopped walking. She said 11. Oliver, yes. She said, "I want the names of every passenger who filed. I want a personal letter from Vantage Airways to each of them. I want a full refund of their ticket price on every flight where Calloway served their cabin section. And I want an apology that is written by a human being and reviewed by me before it goes out. Not boilerplate." Oliver understood. She started walking again. She said, "And I want the complaint review system audited for every route. Not just this one. I want to know how many complaints were closed without action across the fleet in the past 3 years, and I want a number on my desk before the 9 o'clock briefing ends." Oliver, yes, Ms. Hayles. She walked out of the jet bridge into the gate area. The morning light of Heathrow Terminal 3 came through the windows at a low angle, the particular gray gold of an English autumn morning. A few passengers from Flight 7 were still visible down the concourse. The senator was on his phone. Rosa had stopped at a coffee kiosk and was writing in a notebook of her own. Naomi stood in the gate area for a moment and looked at the aircraft through the window. The Boeing 777 sat at the jet bridge ground crew beginning their work around it. Her aircraft, her crew, her responsibility. She thought day one. She opened her notebook. She wrote one line at the bottom of the last page she'd been working on. She wrote, "The structures that protect the Bretts of the world are not accidents. They are choices made over time by people who decided convenience was worth more than truth. Changing them requires the opposite choice made consistently in every room by every person who has the authority to make it." She drew a box around it. She put the notebook under her arm. She walked toward the exit. Before she left the aircraft, she had turned back. This was the part Oliver hadn't expected. He had assumed she would proceed directly to the jet bridge, and he had already started moving in that direction when he noticed she had stopped. She was standing at the threshold of the first-class cabin door, looking back into the space. A few passengers were still there. Rosa was gathering her carry-on. Frank had gone, but the senator was still in his seat in no hurry, looking at something on his phone with the unhurried patience of a man who had decided his connection could wait. Priya was at the galley entrance. Two of the Vantage corporate staff were in the rear completing the handover documentation. Naomi walked back in. She stood at the front of the cabin, not in the center of it, not in a position designed for performance. Just standing the way you stand in a room you want to address honestly. She didn't raise her voice. The cabin was quiet enough that she didn't need to. She said, "I know some of you saw what happened on this flight. I'm not going to ask you to forget it. I'm asking you to remember it. Not because of who I turned out to be, but because of who she was before you knew." She gestured toward Priya. She said, "Priya Sandoval has been on this crew for 4 months. She brought me a cold glass of champagne at hour 2 because she decided it was the right thing to do. She documented the truth in her incident report at hour 6 because she decided it was the right thing to do. She was in an impossible position. A junior crew member, 4 months in with a 22-year senior directly above her in the structure, and she did the right thing twice when it would have been much easier and much safer to do neither." The senator looked up from his phone. Rosa had stopped packing and was listening. Naomi said, "I didn't come on this flight to test anyone. I came because I believe that a CEO who doesn't fly her own airline loses touch with the truth of it. Tonight I found the truth of it in 2 places. I found it in what Brett Calloway did, which I will be addressing in detail. And I found it in what Priya Sandoval did, which I will also be addressing in detail. Both of them showed me exactly what this company is right now." She paused. She said, "I also want to say something about the 11 passengers who filed complaints against the senior purser on this route and received no response that changed anything. I don't know all of their names yet. I will. They sat in a seat they paid for, and they were made to feel wrong for being in it, and then they filed a complaint through the proper channel, and the proper channel closed it without action. 11 times. That is not a failure of one individual. That is a failure of a pattern, a culture that was allowed to continue because no one with the authority to stop it chose to use that authority." She looked around the cabin once more, at the walnut trim and the beige leather and the amber lighting. At the walnut trim she now owned, and the beige leather she now owned, and the amber lighting she now owned. She said, "We're going to change the culture. We're going to change it because of tonight. We're going to change it because of the 11 passengers who came before tonight. And we're going to change it because the standard that said dignity is optional based on how you're dressed or how much someone thinks you paid for your seat, that standard ends as of this morning." The senator put his phone down entirely. He looked at her with the particular attentiveness of a man who has spent a career deciding what is worth listening to. She picked up her notebook. She said, "I've been drafting the framework for that change on this flight. 7 hours of turbulence courtesy of your senior purser, which turned out to be 7 hours of uninterrupted policy development." A small sound from the senator that might have been a laugh. She said, "When we land and the 9 o'clock briefing concludes, the New Horizons initiative will be formally introduced to Vantage's global leadership. Every element of it was informed by what happened in this cabin tonight. I am grateful for the education, however expensive it turned out to be for some of the people involved." She looked at Priya. She said, "The last thing I want to say is this. Integrity isn't something the organization gives you. It's something you carry into the organization. Priya carried it onto this flight before she knew it would matter, before she knew anyone was watching, before she had any reason to believe it would result in anything except Brett being angry with her. That is the only kind of integrity that is actually worth anything. The rest is performance." She held Priya's gaze for a moment. She said, "Thank you for flying Vantage." She walked out of the cabin. In the galley, Priya stood with her hands at her sides and let out one long, quiet breath. She looked at the galley ceiling. She looked at the curtain. She thought about 4 months. About the day she had taken this job because she believed in it. About the way that belief had been tested for the last 7 hours on a transatlantic flight at 34,000 feet. She thought it held. The senator rose from his seat. He paused at the galley entrance and looked at Priya. He said, "She's right about you." And then he walked off the plane. Rosa was the last to leave. She stopped beside Priya on the way to the door. She said, "I'm going to write about what you did. Not just what she did, what you did." Priya said, "You don't have to." Rosa said, "I know." She smiled. "That's why I'm going to." Then the cabin was empty. Priya stood alone in it for a moment, the amber lighting the walnut trim, the 8 seats of a first-class cabin that would never be quite the same space it had been yesterday. She looked at seat 1A. The battered leather notebook was gone. The plastic cup from 7 hours ago was long cleared away. She started the post-flight check. She moved through the cabin methodically, professionally, the way she had been trained. She straightened the headrest covers. She collected the remaining service items. She verified the seat positions. When she got to seat 1A, she straightened the linen headrest cover and looked at the space for a moment. She thought 4 months. She thought it was enough. The holding room at Heathrow's Port Authority station was small and fluorescent and smelled of industrial cleaning fluid and the particular quality of air in rooms where people wait for things they cannot stop from happening. Brett sat at the table with his hands folded in front of him and his eyes on the surface. His lawyer, a compact man named Higgins, who had been roused at 6 in the morning and had arrived looking tired and precise, sat across from him with a folder open between them. Higgins said, "Let me walk you through where we are. Filing a false police report under UK law. Falsifying a crew safety document. That's a civil aviation violation, which means the Civil Aviation Authority is also involved. The airline is also pursuing a parallel civil suit for gross misconduct and reputational damage." He paused. He said, "Those are the legal problems. They are in practical terms the least of your problems." Brett looked up. Higgins turned his tablet around. On it was a screen showing Rosa Fuentes' Instagram feed, the breadbasket clip, the lavatory clip. The moment Oliver Marsh walked past Brett without stopping. The moment Naomi said, "I am the person who signs your paycheck." Below it, on X, the hashtag Vantage Airways had been trending for 4 hours. A clip from the cabin footage, released by Vantage Airways' corporate communications team at 7:14 a.m., under a statement that read, "We are sharing this footage in full transparency as part of our commitment to accountability," had been viewed 3.2 million times. The clip included the audio from the forward galley, Brett's voice saying what he had said to Naomi near the lavatory door. The words hung in the trending feed the way words do when there is no context that makes them acceptable. Simply present, simply documented, simply what they were. Higgins said, "You are unhirable, Brett. Every carrier in this industry has seen this footage. The union has already been contacted and has indicated they cannot provide representation in cases involving falsified safety documentation. Your pension is subject to review under the gross misconduct clause of your employment contract." Brett put his head in his hands. He thought about 22 years. He thought about the Senators Bordeaux and the Goldman CFO who hated small talk, and the sound the cabin door made when it sealed at pushback, and the particular satisfaction of a service he considered perfectly executed. He thought about the uniform which he had pressed himself every morning for 22 years, because he believed it represented something worth maintaining. He thought about a woman in a Yale hoodie with a plastic cup of rose and a battered leather notebook, sitting in seat 1A at 34,000 feet writing. He understood now what she had been writing. He had been there for 7 hours, and he had not understood it until this room, this fluorescent light, this folder with his name on it. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say that would change the shape of what had happened. The kingdom was gone. What remained was just a man who had mistaken cruelty for authority for so long that he no longer knew the difference sitting in a room where that distinction was now being made for him by a legal process. Higgins closed the folder. He said, "Do you want to tell me your version of events?" Brett said no. He didn't have a version. He had a certainty, and the certainty was wrong, and it had been wrong from the beginning. The Vantage Airways European Division headquarters occupied the 11th floor of a building in Canary Wharf that looked east over the Thames toward the financial district. The morning light was coming in at a low angle through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of October light that is thin and clear and seems to illuminate things more precisely than warmer light does. Naomi walked in at 9:07 a.m. She was still wearing the Yale hoodie. She was still wearing the worn Converse. She had not changed. She had arrived and arrived exactly as herself. Every person in the room stood. She looked at the room. 12 executives, the European leadership team, 3 board members who had come in from separate cities for this briefing. Oliver Marsh standing near the door. She looked at the room with the same attention she had given the first-class cabin 7 hours ago, the attention of someone who has just become responsible for a space and is seeing it clearly for the first time. She set her notebook on the table. She sat down at the head of it. She said, "I've been drafting the New Horizons initiative since approximately 30 minutes after pushback on Flight 7. Here is what it contains." She opened the notebook. She read from it directly without preamble. She said, "First, all fare categories in first and business class are entitled to identical beverage and meal service. There is no tiering of amenities based on ticket origin. The words non-revenue passenger no longer exist as a service category inside this cabin. If you paid for the seat comes with everything the seat comes with." She said, "Second, the passenger complaint review system is being rebuilt from the ground up. No complaint will be closed without independent third-party review. Any crew member with 4 or more complaints in a rolling 12-month period is automatically flagged for investigation, regardless of seniority, regardless of tenure." She said, "Third, seniority is not a shield, it is a record. Positive seniority means positive record. Negative seniority, complaints, incidents, documented bias, means the opposite. The current culture in which 22 years of service provides insulation from accountability ends today." She paused. She said, "I want to be clear about something. The problem on Flight 7 last night was not Brett Calloway. Brett Calloway was the outcome of a culture that allowed him to exist and operate and accumulate 11 passenger complaints without consequence over 6 years. He is a symptom. The culture is the disease. We are treating the culture." She looked around the room. She said, "Any questions?" One hand went up. A junior analyst near the window. He said, "What do we tell the press about the footage release?" "Naomi, we already told them. We released the footage with a statement that said we are committed to transparency and we take full responsibility for the environment that allowed this behavior to continue for 6 years. We do not defend it. We do not contextualize it. We say what it was, and we say what we're doing about it." A board member at the far end of the table. "The stock took a hit in pre-market this morning." "Naomi, it will recover." She said it with the confidence of someone who has read the data on companies that face public accountability incidents and respond with transparency versus companies that cover them up. Companies that cover it up trade a short-term stock hit for a long-term trust deficit. We are not doing that. She said, "I also want to say, we have an employee whose conduct on this flight this morning deserves to be named in this room. Priya Sandoval. 4 months with Vantage previously on domestic regional routes. She behaved with more integrity on last night's flight than the combined structure that was supposed to prevent what she had to witness. She is being fast-tracked to senior purser. She will be leading new hire hospitality training within the month. Her story is going to be as much a part of how we talk about this initiative as Brett Calloway's is. Maybe more." She closed the notebook. She said, "Let's get to work." The briefing ran until 11:40. Oliver Marsh walked Naomi to a private lounge on the floor above the conference room. A quiet space, 2 chairs, a table overlooking the Thames. The city was going about its morning beneath the window, the river the color of pewter. A low barge moving east at the pace of something that has done this every day for 100 years. Oliver said, "I'll leave you to decompress. The car will be ready at 1 for the hotel." She said, "Thank you, Oliver." He turned to go. He stopped. He turned back. He said, "Ms. Hayles, I've been with this company for 11 years. In 11 years, I have never had to personally apologize to our CEO at the gate for what happened on one of our own flights. I hope you know that is not who we want to be." She looked at him. She said, "I know. That's why I'm here." He nodded. He left. She sat in the chair facing the window. She put her notebook on the table. She did not open it. A few minutes later, a quiet knock. A young member of the office staff came in with a tray. On it, a crystal flute, Dom Perignon 2015. Cold the condensation just forming on the glass. Beside it, a small note on Vantage stationery that read, in Oliver's handwriting, with the compliments of the European division. Welcome. She looked at the glass. She looked at the note. She picked up the flute. She held it toward the window, toward the pewter river and the gray London sky, and she looked at the bubbles moving upward through the gold liquid, steady, unhurried going where they were going. She took a sip. She set the glass down. She opened her notebook. She looked at the line she had drawn at the bottom of the last page, day 1. She drew a line through it. She wrote day 2. She picked up her pen. She kept working. 3 months after Flight 7, Priya Sandoval stood at the entrance to the first-class galley of Vantage Airways Flight 7 and reviewed the catering manifest on a new digital tablet. The old ones had been replaced as part of the operational upgrade, one of 47 changes that had rolled out across the fleet in 12 weeks. Her uniform was the same navy as before, but pinned to the left lapel, catching the cabin's amber pre-boarding light, were gold wings. Senior Purser. She was the youngest in the airline's history to hold the designation. She had passed the accelerated leadership assessment with the highest score in the current cohort. The examiner had written in her review, demonstrates composure under pressure, clear ethical judgment, strong mentorship instincts, recommend immediate placement. She had framed the review. It was on the wall of her flat in Hounslow next to a photo of her first flight badge from the domestic regional carrier and a postcard of the Yorkshire coast that had nothing to do with aviation, but reminded her of what she was working toward. Standing beside her in the galley was Leo Vasquez, 24 years old, 2 months into his Vantage training, who was holding the manifest the way Priya had once held one, with both hands slightly too tightly as if it might try to leave. She said, shoulders down, Leo. We're not guarding anything. We're hosting dinner. He exhaled. His posture loosened. He said, sorry, it's just first transatlantic. She said, I know. She smiled. It was my first transatlantic once, too. She paused. Then she said, the most important thing I'm going to tell you about this job is this. Every passenger who comes through that door has already told you something about themselves by the time they sit down. The question is whether you're listening for it or deciding for it in advance. Don't decide. Listen, Leo said. What's the difference? She said, you'll know it when it matters. She went over the service cart. She confirmed the Dom Perignon. 2 full bottles in the forward ice bucket, as there always had been. She confirmed the meal counts. She confirmed that the new service protocol, identical amenity presentation for all fare categories, was in place and documented. This was as of 90 days ago, not a suggestion. It was a logged operational standard verified before every departure. In 3 months on the routes operating under the New Horizons, protocol's passenger complaint filings across all categories had dropped by 61%. Customer satisfaction scores had increased by 19 points. 3 other senior crew members had been suspended pending review following complaint audits. The complaint system had been rebuilt and was now processing reviews independently within 72 hours of filing. 11 letters had gone out to the passengers who had filed complaints against Brett Calloway, each one written by a human being and reviewed personally by Naomi before dispatch. Each letter included a full refund, an unreserved apology, and an invitation to fly Vantage again as a guest of the airline. 7 had responded. 6 of them had taken the invitation. The boarding door opened. Passengers began to file in. Priya greeted each of them by name from the manifest. The businessman in 1B traveling to London for a board presentation. The woman in 3A with the window seat and the novel she had been saving for a long flight. The elderly gentleman in 2F who asked quietly if they still served the 2009 Bordeaux and looked genuinely delighted when she said yes. Leo was at the service cart following the protocol, his posture better now, his hands steady. The jet bridge sounds changed. The particular shift that means the last passenger is boarding. Priya looked toward the door. A woman walked down the jet bridge at the same pace she always walked. Unhurried, direct, carrying a small backpack over one shoulder and a battered leather notebook under her arm. She was wearing a soft gray cashmere sweater this time, comfortable travel trousers, and the same worn Converse she had worn 3 months ago to the day. The notebook was the same one. It was more worn now, the corners rounded down from 3 months of daily use, the cover bearing the faint imprint of a pen that had written through many pages. She was the last passenger to board because she was always the last to board. She had decided 3 months ago that being the owner of the airline did not entitle her to board first. It entitled her to board when everyone else was settled, and to be the last person the crew saw before the door closed so they knew she had seen them. She stepped through the cabin door. The cabin went quiet for a moment, a breath of recognition, warm and immediate. People knew her now, not from the footage or not only from the footage, from the New Horizons briefings that had been shared with every crew member, from the announcement that had been made at the European Division at 9:07 a.m. on an October morning, from the Vantage newsletter that had run a piece with the headline, "The Woman Who Flew Herself Home." Priya was at the door to meet her. Their eyes found each other and held the particular conversation that exists between people who went through something difficult together and came out the other side changed by it. Priya said, "Welcome home, Naomi." Naomi looked around the cabin, the amber lighting the walnut trim, the 8 seats of a first-class cabin that was the same and entirely different from the one she had sat in 3 months ago. She took it in the way she always took a space in, thoroughly, with attention, with responsibility. She said, "It feels lighter." Priya said with the smallest smile, "We took out the trash." Naomi laughed. It was a full, genuine laugh, the kind that comes from something landing exactly right. She moved to seat 1A. She settled in. She put her notebook on her knee. She clicked her pen. She looked out the window at the JFK tarmac. A different morning, different weather, the October light clear and cold over the runway. Leo appeared with a silver tray. He was trying hard not to show how much this moment mattered. He set the tray on the linen tablecloth with precise, careful hands. On it a crystal flute, Dom Perignon 2015. Cold, perfect bubbles rising in steady, unhurried lines. He didn't ask, he simply placed it. Naomi looked at it. Then she looked at Leo, who was trying very hard to be professional and was doing an excellent job of it. She said, "Thank you." He said, "Of course, Ms. Hayles." She said, "Naomi." He smiled. He went back to the service cart. Priya appeared at this galley entrance for a brief moment, the gold wings catching the amber light. She looked at seat 1A. She looked at the glass of champagne on the linen tablecloth, cold and real, and placed without hesitation or condition. She thought about a flight 3 months ago and a cold half bottle carried forward in the dark. She thought it was enough. Naomi picked up the glass. She held it toward the window for a moment. The cold morning light, the runway extending toward the horizon, the engines beginning their low pre-departure song beneath her seat. She took a sip. She opened the notebook. She looked at day 2, which she had written in a lounge in Canary Wharf overlooking the Thames on an October morning that felt like a different lifetime. She turned to a fresh page. She wrote in clean block letters at the top, "Vantage Airways, New Horizons Initiative, Month 4. She clicked her pen. She kept working. Have you ever been handed a plastic cup when you asked for something real? Have you ever walked into a room you had every right to be in and felt someone decide before you opened your mouth that you didn't belong there? I want to hear from you. Drop your story in the comments below. Tell me your city, tell me your moment, tell me what you did with it, or what you wish you had. I read every single one and I want to know. If this story moved you, if Naomi's notebook or Priya's half bottle of champagne in the dark or Frank DeLuca quietly moving his armrest and positioning himself between seat 1A and the aisle, if any of that landed somewhere real for you, hit the like button right now. It costs you nothing and it helps more people find stories like this one. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next, because we have more stories like this one waiting for you. Remember this: true power doesn't need to announce itself. It boards last. It wears a Yale hoodie. It writes in a battered notebook at 34,000 feet, and it changes the culture of every room it enters. Not by shouting, but by knowing exactly who it is when the room tries to tell it otherwise. Naomi Hayles didn't just fire a bully, she rebuilt a culture. And she did it by doing the one thing that costs everything when the world is trying to take it from you. She stayed exactly herself. That is what this story is about. If this video gave you something today, a feeling, a reminder, a moment of yes, that's it. Please like it, share it, and subscribe. It means everything to this channel, and it means more people get to hear stories that matter. Until next time, stay kind, stay grounded, and never underestimate what one person with a notebook and a long flight can accomplish. See you in the next one.